think it's gonna happen.
Denver, they're leaving us out of this.
Okay,
Hair growing contest.
we are live.
They're leaving us out of the hair growing contest.
Yeah, I think we're not in this race.
Okay, we can call the meeting to order at 2:02 p.m. And we'll start with the approval of minutes. Has everyone had a chance to have a look? Would anyone like to make a motion?
Move to approve the minutes
As they are.
March 13th, 2019.
Okay, Kyle's made a motion to approve. A second?
Second?
Okay, Denver seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed? Motion passes. Okay, citizens to be heard. Welcome, John.
Hi, John.
No citizens. Board and staff reports. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share at this time, since we're now doing this at the top of the meeting?
Yeah, I'm on the discussion of the USGS studies update down in 5. Is it time for me to do that now, or should I wait?
Let's see. Well, we do have a discussion of right at the end of the meeting of the USGS reports. Maybe let's save it for then, for when Eric's, oh, he's here now. Okay, but we'll save it if that is okay. Anyone else with anything? Any board reports, updates? Rosemary, how are you doing?
I did go to the meeting in the Spanish Valley, San Juan County meeting the other night. And, over 100 people were there.
Oh, have they had one since they had one a month and a half ago or 6 weeks ago?
They had one
I'd like
last
to be on,
week or
I'd
whatever.
like to be on that mailing list.
Well, there's no mailing list to it.
Okay.
It was
Okay, anyways, go ahead.
Eve. I think Eve sent it out, some information to go to that meeting. So it was a good turnout. And a lot of agitated people there, mostly about the truck stops and ATVs and opening of roads and no control, no zoning, no nothing. So it was a planning commission meeting in San Juan County.
Much room for public comment, or really just people in attendance?
A lot of comment.
Yeah. That was just last week? Or?
I think so, yeah.
So that's not in the paper yet, maybe? Maybe there'll be something on it.
I thought that the Times Independent had a reporter there, or I understood that they might.
It would make sense, yeah.
It might be this week.
That would, okay.
There's a lot of discussion there.
Any notable, all sorts of things?
Well, the water was brought up, that they lacked the water. Comments, Jeff, and Mayor.
Yeah.
Dave
Good.
Caswell.
Ex-mayor.
Ex-mayor Caswell. So the water was brought up, a lot of other things were brought up.
So,
Yeah.
I'm late, I'm sorry. We pulled the USGS discussion from the agenda, or are we going to talk about that?
We are going to talk about it. It's actually down at the bottom. Do you have any time constraints?
Okay,
or?
so I just finished talking to Chuck, and we kind of object to it. We don't feel it's appropriate, since we've heard from the USGS, the professor who's doing the study, that it's the draft only. So we don't feel it's appropriate to discuss it in public at a public meeting like this. We would like that it wait until the paper's published before the public gets information on.
Couldn't you get us a redacted copy?
Well, that's just what Chuck would like to do. So it's professional. And he also does, we talked about not doing the Ken Combe thing in the same light, because it's just a draft. So I was going to talk about that, but I don't want to.
So I understand why we would want to wait, because they're a draft, but if we wait to when they're final, then the opportunity to comment on the draft is gone.
I think you're free to comment just like we had the last draft, and then we'll get the comments back to USGS. So I think that was expected by Melissa, but I think discussing it in public where the public could possibly be misinformed, and then we'd have to correct it and so on.
So I would like to then ask Eve if that would be a suitable reason to have a closed meeting.
That's a good question. I guess the concern I have about the Colm report is, can you explain Chuck's reasoning for not discussing the Colm report with the Water Board?
Well, at this point, I read it. Chuck hasn't finished, and we have some issues with Ken's numbers on the water budget and some of his calculations and so on in regard to the water budget. But he also did a volume aquifer volume report also for us. So, but the water budget, it seems to have some contradictions with the USGS numbers. And if we start talking numbers that he has, we aren't prepared to answer those questions. So it's just, you're just going to be misinformed at this point, we think.
I think Arnie's got a really good point. I mean, I've got some questions. I tried to compare the revision 2 to revision 3, and there are some changes. And I have some questions about, is that a really smart way to figure out a better way to do it? Or why did they make the changes? And I don't have the technical knowledge. And I need somebody that I can talk to and say, something changed. Is that a good change or a bad change? Is that the way they do it in hydrology? Or is this, not the best way to do it? How are we going to talk among ourselves and have something reasonable to say to the USGS and KenCom while the process is going on? Once it comes out, then it doesn't matter what we think. I mean, we just got paved over, actually, I think.
I think you're free to talk among yourselves. I mean, as far as that goes. I mean, you both all have the reports, so I don't think there's any violation of the trust of USGS to discuss it between ourselves. But when we start talking in front of newspaper reporters or, members of the public, then it becomes something else.
Would that fix the problem then if we'd have a closed meeting? Because I don't know how I'm ever going to get everybody together in this room. And some people that have got a lot of technical knowledge, some people have got political knowledge, some people have got legal knowledge. And together, I think we're a pretty formidable group. But one by one, I think all of us can use a little help from time to time. And that's why I would like to have a closed meeting so we could talk about these reports among ourselves. And I could listen to the smart people on the board and say, well, yeah, that's the way we always do it, or don't worry, or whatever.
Well, we would have to do it that way anyway, just because if we all got together, it would be a quorum and we'd have to do a public session. So really the only way for us to talk as a group is in a closed session, which, Eve, can we add to the end of this agenda? Or
I think it has to be posted.
Even that has to be posted.
I've already asked about
it doesn't fall into any of the categories.
Yeah.
Yeah, closed is usually litigation or personal, like HR.
I guess the concern that I have about the city council hired the water board for a reason, and it was to form some expert opinions from the citizen experts, if you will, so that they can make better decisions going forward. And if the water board can't get access to the information that the city's paying for, then I think that I'll probably just need to take it up with David.
Now, you all don't have the KenCom report. That was not given to the board members. I think you could request it from Chuck.
Well, I did request it.
And then,
Ken was told that Chuck didn't want him to give it to us. I actually have it, I just didn't open it because he said, oops, I shouldn't have sent you that.
I can't interfere with what Chuck or David do.
Yeah,
But,
I understand.
I mean, the board was given permission to see the USGS, and there seems to be a difference of standard there. So, I mean, Ken Combs' work is the same. So I'm kind of neutral on it. So.
Hi, God.
Sorry I'm late. Apologies.
No problem. We're having a discussion about a non-discussion at the moment.
Cool. That's kind.
There's been a request on behalf of the city not to publicly discuss the information that we received in the latest draft of the USGS report, which we're discussing as it pertains to our role in having access to and being able to discuss that information to inform the city. So.
Well, don't let me interrupt. Keep going.
Yeah, well, we're coming to a head with it at the moment. Maybe there could be some follow-up with staff would be the best bet as opposed to pursuing anything right now, since we are live on YouTube and this is a discussion that we want to respect all parties for.
Two updates on here, update on the water budget for the Ken Combe report, and the other one on the agenda, the discussion of the USGS study update.
Yep.
What you're suggesting at this point in time is that since we have the USGS study update, the latest draft, that we go ahead and discuss that in this meeting as per the plan, and then as we do not have any update on the water budget from Ken Combe, and we cannot obtain that as per the request of the city engineer, if we would like to comment on it between the time of the draft and final, our best bet would be to ask the city engineer to please release it to us.
Or ask David, because, you know, I think there's, like I mentioned yesterday, I presented the 10-year plan, and one of my comments was, you know, different groups have different perspectives. And so when Chuck's looking at a parking lot, he's looking at it one way. When I'm looking at a parking lot, I look at it as like heat island effect and stormwater retention and whether something's permeable or not. And so I think we should look at the Ken Combe report. And I'll ask David as well.
Well, I don't think a motion's in hand here in terms of, but as far as the board's concerned, if it pleases you two, let's go ahead and discuss the USGS study update as per the agenda.
Can we do that? I mean, I thought.
That's
Oh, no, well, only in general terms.
Okay.
In general terms.
Okay.
okay.
And then, and as we have no information on the Ken Combe report, we may as well strike that from the agenda.
Yes.
That makes sense. Yep.
Yes.
Meanwhile, go back to the agenda.
Okay.
Which
Board and staff reports?
we're still on board and staff reports, so if anyone has anything else to add now that we have a few more folks here. If not, we'll move on from that. Anything new, Cara?
I don't have
Okay.
anything new. Sorry, I'm almost in this room. Just stopped
Okay.
operating a piece of equipment about 10 minutes ago, so I'm almost in this room.
So
You can
Mike,
keep going.
Mike, as you know, is out sick, and he said that he
Yep.
could present his briefing at the May meeting.
At the May meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, so,
I took a brief look, and I'd like to congratulate on him on what he's done so far anyways. I'd just like to mention that. And I'm looking forward to talking with him about it.
Yeah, it seems like it'll be a really great.
So glad he's on, I'm so glad he's on this board, and I'm so glad he's a member of the city council right
Yep.
now.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I think it'll be very helpful. So yeah, we'll all be waiting with bated breath, I think.
that will be in May. Pending a few conversations with the city, we may be looking at the Combe report at that point too, but I guess we'll wait to hear back about that. With no other board or staff reports, let's move on to other business. Top of the list is outdoor watering campaign update. Do we have anything?
Do you have something?
Well, yesterday when I presented the 10-year plan, part of the 2019 priorities were the VCAP and then also a residential campaign. So that could cover some of the funding for the water campaign. And I did take Cara's table and my table and combine them and send it on to Eve.
You did?
Yeah, and they got sent to everybody, and I forgot to print one out, so I'm trying to look at it on my phone, and it's not working very well.
Okay.
But
So have we put ads in the paper yet? Does anybody know?
I just talked to Lisa before this meeting, and she said it's now due for right at the end of April,
Okay.
I believe. So that's what we're looking at. There's been a big backlog, but that's the plan now. She's got it on the list. So,
Considering it keeps raining,
Yeah.
I don't think.
so
Yeah.
not a big deal.
There you have it.
And I did get a hold of Pat and got his contacts from Grand Junction, so I sent them a notice out that we wanted to do a seminar, and I'm just waiting back to hear from them. And I brought it up to the conservation board yesterday, just to, let them know what we were doing. They said it would be really nice if those same technicians talked about agricultural practices and use of water. So I said, okay, I'll throw that in the request for
Those are
information.
really different.
Yeah.
I mean, residential irrigation and ag is really, wow, okay, that's an interesting, but yeah.
Most of the ag people aren't,
Not in
if
city
they're
limits.
farmers at this point in time, they've got a farm number with the NRCS, and in order to get any money from the NRCS, they have to do a water conservation plan and a nutrient conservation plan. So most of our ag people, although I realize that there are some people that think that they're watering 24 hours a day, indeed they are because they need to. Most of them already have a water conservation plan.
You know what I think Sam was interested in? That there's a lot of like new people
That's what I was gonna
that
say.
have come into town, and they're buying like 2 acres.
Right.
And so they're not sort of the traditional ag farmers, but they're, sort of new to the county, and they are taking this up. And I think there's some concern that they are not as conscientious as some of the people that
As
probably have
informed.
plans.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had to miss yesterday's meeting too because of this truck, but I suspect, knowing that board, that that's exactly what Sam was thinking, is that it's
Yeah.
lots of people interested in sort of market gardens, and so they don't have experience, and they aren't gonna
So
necessarily
then it
get
would be
NRCS.
appropriate.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
one 2 acre kind of
Can
folks.
you can step back? I know we discussed having, Pat Dean was gonna have some people here, and he's no longer with us, and you've taken the reins on that. I appreciate that. When, did we set a date on that, or a forum, or any sort of venue?
We didn't set a date. What I asked them for 2 dates in May. So it's the Grand Junction pipe
Yeah.
irrigation. And so I said, what about a May 23rd or May 30th as a possibility, late afternoon, since they're driving here?
And they're just gonna drive over for the day and drive home?
Yeah, I think so.
And they drive over every week to do delivery anyway, so, yeah, GJ Pipe is over here constantly, so it's not a big deal.
Okay, that sounds great. What other are we doing? We were doing ads? Something already showed up in my bill, I think, for water. Was there something in my water bill about conservation?
It shouldn't have been yet. That should be next month or end of this month into next month.
This month or the next month?
Yep.
This month was recycling.
Yeah, and then
Yep.
irrigation was on here, and I apologize for not, I meant to get to this today to fill in some added things, so I'll do that. And you had some stuff you were thinking of adding, Jeremy, as far as some historic information.
Oh, yeah,
maybe?
that whole project.
Is that
Yeah.
might be good to get into this of like different times of year?
I just talked to Lisa about that before this meeting again too. What she was saying that would be best on their end would be if we could compile, for example, if we want to do 1 a month or 2 a month, 12 to 24 listings. And so I can work on that, put that together, submit it to the board, and then we can just plug it into the schedule that way. So
Yeah, because I could see like in September, there's some really great ones of when
Yeah.
the floods came down Mill Creek and whatever. And so doing them at like the right time of year could be really cool.
Does the
Yep.
whole board really need to sit in on this?
no, the whole board doesn't need to. I was saying I'll do something independent of the board, and if anyone wants to
Wanna run
review
by
it.
If you want to run it by the chair, or if anybody's interested
Sure.
in, that'd be
The
great.
idea behind this topic, Arnie, was simply to have this calendar go before all of us, not to nitpick it, but so we
Right.
all know what's going on and we can throw, like, Jeremy's
be aware.
idea came up
Yeah.
in part because of this conversation. So, yeah, I think that's great.
So we can just
I
plug
don't
in
need
there.
to see the ads, Chair.
Don't read it.
I'll wait.
But it'll be there if you want to, in other
Read
words.
it when it comes down to the paper.
Yeah, that's more exciting that way.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. If that's the outdoor watering campaign, we're not looking at item 5.2 now, so review of the 2016 water conservation plan. That was our homework, to pick a few things out here and there for a discussion. Maybe we should just go round table and talk about what we pulled out individually.
Does anybody need a hard copy?
Hard copy, yeah.
Sorry, I totally am prepared.
Would anyone like to begin?
I have a copy that you can borrow for this time being. There were some small comments that I went through this, and I found my copy with all my comments on it prior to this.
Nice.
And most of my comments stand, and I was gonna make that comment that was also with these benchmarks that were in Rosemary's document, and that was, they were mostly, well, not mostly. Some of them were just formatting things. We keep it all in acre feet, as opposed to throw some things out there in gallons and some things throw out there in different units. And I did some math, and I thought that some of the math wasn't quite right, and I said some of that also at the time, but that can all be fixed.
Do you want to talk about specific pages?
Or is that something that would be easier to send a document with those things? Ernie, what's your?
Well, I thought I'd written something to you at one point in time.
You probably did, yeah.
And I threw it out there that, okay, the next time you go to write this, please take these comments.
I've got something.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. Page 29 and 30, the recommendation, what we did with the recommendations for the implementation of water conservation measures.
Yeah, I have a bunch of comments on that.
If we could have a report from Mrs.
Sure.
On how we're doing on that, what we've done, anything that we
Oh, an update?
It's quite a list. Yeah,
Yes.
that's a lot of my comments
Quite a
ended up
list.
falling in that spectrum of, well, what have we accomplished and what we were setting out to do so far.
And I as well was thinking that this would be a good one to look at and go, okay, it's been a couple of years now. How do we want to change
Are
this
there
list?
some others, some
Yeah, do we want
priorities?
to add some things, do we want to strike some things?
And it might be good to prioritize.
Yeah, yes, prioritize and group. I tend to like lists
Yeah.
like this where
It's-
there's kind of groups of them, because it helps my mind anyway, organize my thoughts. So, yeah.
Yep.
There seemed to be, I looked at this and thought that's pretty overwhelming, like 2 pages of goals.
Yeah.
This is pretty heavy lifting. And when I was reading through them, it seemed like some of these things are inside the city. For instance, ensure plumbing codes require more efficient fixtures. That's something the city can do. They write the codes. And then there's some of them, like the one that says, form what's called a regional water board, that we can't do it. The mayor has got to do that, I suppose, with the other stakeholders. And I was thinking if we could separate this into things that the city could do with, I guess by fiat, if that's the right word, if you make a rule, and things that require an enormous amount of heavy lifting, like working out an agreement with everybody who has a straw in our aquifer about how development is going to be. Because this report is, to me, just excellent, and they don't pull any punches about ensuring that we take care of the supply of water to the city of Moab. They say, for instance, reduce the impact on current supply. The approval of large new developments in Moab must be linked to assurances there is an adequate water supply over a 20-year period. I think that's an excellent idea, but I don't know if there's anything we could do about that on the board. And that might be the biggest deal on all of these pages. I'm not sure.
What page is that on?
Page 29,
It's
it's
at
the
the
last
bottom of
paragraph.
29.
Oh, right, okay. I remember that we did that. And I think, though, that
The line
we've
is
taken
Page 29 and 30.
some steps already. You know, we've
Done
sent,
to planning councils.
yeah, we sent something to the city council about the recent
What I found.
high, or didn't we send a letter to the county about the density overlay?
Yeah, then we sent the current water uses and the type of uses, that chart. I put together a chart, I think, for this group.
Yeah, we did, and it was presented at the meeting. I was there.
I think that's one of the problems. There's so many stakeholders, so many committees, so many special committees, so many, I've forgotten all the, I was trying to read all the different things. It's really hard to know who's done what. And, you know, something like this, and the last one is action, that the city take action to protect the aquifer from potential threats posed by proposed development throughout the watershed. This includes Sitla land at Johnson's Up on Top, as well as upgradient public and private land administered by the county's BLM and USFM.
So you got it. Your idea is great here, and
Kyle.
not a problem with names. Say Kyle. That probably the most important part of this document in terms of the future is the recommendations and implementations. And although I may have lots of trivial, what I would call trivial comments on what's actually in the document in terms of numbers, perhaps we should review these one at a time right now. There's not that many of them. There's a handful. We could go through them and see what we've done and see what we might want to change as we go forward.
Sure.
So one thing I would just toss out there, because it will, that I think is a great idea, it'll need a little bit of time, is I would suggest that this is probably one of the most critical parts of it. And part of what I was thinking we were going to do by doing this wasn't to do the reviews today of each section, but to have a list of what we might then do more reviews of later. So I just don't want to lose. Either we need to leave another agenda item for next time to go over this again, or we should make sure we get that list this time. So I don't care which way you guys want to do it.
That's a good point. I think some of these things we wouldn't necessarily have the answers to. Maybe there's some action being taken on behalf of the city that we would need to consult with them anyway on. That seems like it might be a more efficient way to pass it by them, but to make a recommendation to let the city actually do that. The only other thing I can see with these items is I think it would be more effective. I guess I'm getting back to what you're saying, Carl, which is looking at this document and what do we recommend to make it a more effective or readable document, something that we can, make more coherent over time. And just a simple list, which while it's really important and it has a lot of great items, I'm thinking about another strategic plan in the county. They have it broken down out into years. So we have a year, a 2, a 3, 4, 5-year goal. I think something like this list here needs to be broken out in that way, in addition to who is the projected player and who's getting one thing or the other done, whether it's the city or somebody else. Also, what is the time frame for that? Because looking at this list, I would be curious how many folks in the city have really thoroughly gone through the list as opposed to just acted on things that we've recommended off of it or that we've taken up. So
Well, I agree with you that there are short-term goals that we could do immediately, and then there's long-term goals.
Sure.
I'm not sure the vision that their 2020 vision plan the city's 2020 vision plan should be the one saying we're going to do this in 3 years. However, we could be telling them this needs to be done in a hurry and this needs to be done because they're the ones that actually have to do it. So I don't necessarily want to tell them that you have to do this in 2 years when they know inside their institution that they can't. But if we tell them this is immediate, maybe that brings that focus and they can pull it farther forward if possible.
Well, that would make sense for where we're at right now. Isn't the next iteration of this is 2021?
For this, but the city's vision goals is in 2020. Is that correct?
Yeah, but so yesterday, part of the presentation was part of the new plan has an appendix that goes through all the water goals, who are the stakeholders, that's one of the appendices. Then another appendix is timelines. So a 10-year plan for the water goals, for intermediate, for short-term, for long-term. So maybe those two appendices compared to this might be.
Yeah, and I think importantly, in addition to the Vision 2020, now we have a sustainability plan. That wasn't even, it wasn't even on the page before we published this document.
Yeah, because the 2020 plan had no numerical goals. It had no baseline data. So it was, let's, restore the integrity of the streams kind of a level. So now it's like, okay, here's the baseline data. This is what a 20% reduction would be. This is a 20% reduction from these different players, like residential versus commercial. And then yet another appendices in it was looking at strategies in terms of the sweet spot between equity, return on investment, and environmental benefits. So given the, the lack of resources, basically, it's like out of all these strategies, what ones can we realistically do with the budget?
So Rosemary, can you work these two documents together and sort of
See what's missing.
see what's missing?
Is the idea, Arnie, that you'd like to distill what is priority for us out of this list, and then?
Well, there's several things on this list that are mentioned more than once, and some of them I'm not. They should really be combined into a bigger thing. And the other thing, several of these things have already been done.
Sure.
And that's where I don't know if it makes sense to go through all that today, or to have work on for the next meeting, maybe taking this, because I like the idea of what are sort of relatively simple things the city can do on its own versus the things that require collaboration versus what's really amorphous, and how the heck do we actually get to that, so that like just categorizing it that way and then comparing it to what we already have, I think we might be able to get a much clearer sense. And also, because then it might, all that thing of things that are repetitive versus things that don't have enough detail might all shake out as we do that. And then we can also track what's already been done. And then, okay, fine, that's been done. Do we need to do more? Or is it done? And that, I think, is more than we can do right now.
One specific thing I'd like to know is the wastewater treatment plant and how much water we anticipated saving about 90% less water.
Yeah.
And how that is working out. I know we haven't had a full year of it, but we might have some idea of what
we do. We just did a little case study about it, about the water reduction.
And maybe we should get Greg here to give us a report.
He was the wastewater treatment plant operator of the year for the state of Utah.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
I hate to be the one on the committee that says I have a great idea. Why doesn't somebody else do a whole lot of work? But you know how to do this, and I would volunteer, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about the workings of the government to know what, city government and so forth, to know what's been done and the things you know. So can you do that, or are we asking you to do too much?
No, it's fine. Actually, looking through them, like almost all of them are in that plan already.
And I'd be happy to work on it with you if you wanted to back and forth some emails between now and the next meeting.
Okay.
Maybe
Greg can certainly compare what the plant has been how the plant's been performing since it came online to similar months in recent years. So that can be done.
Yeah.
I suppose the question that kept coming up for me as I was reading it was, who is looking at these goals? But I suppose the answer is, you've been looking through these documents and making these plans. So maybe if we have, let's just swinging back around to the intention of this conversation, if we have a very specific, whether it's something that we picked out of here that we think is irrelevant or inappropriate, or I don't know, maybe let's look through or look at the document in that way, as opposed to more broadly at a section, but something in particular that strikes us as, oh, well, 5 years later or 3 or 5 years later, we don't need it anymore. We really need to be emphasizing that. Is there anything that stuck out to anybody along those lines?
Yes.
Yes.
Composting toilets.
Uh-huh.
So there's some excellent on-site wastewater systems down there nowadays that weren't around 5-6 years ago. And Orion, our environmental health director here, is not necessarily in favor of composting toilets. However, some of the newer on-site wastewater systems, which are not, quote, composting toilets, they're a little different, are something that if you're not able to hook up to a sewer, that's great. But at this point in time, Orion hasn't made the shift to say that even if you can hook up to the sewer, we're going to let you put an on-site wastewater treatment plant in. That's not the way he sees it. So we've got in here secondary water systems and composting toilets in the same sentence. And I would like them to be kept as separate entities because they are much different animals. And the secondary water systems, the new rules for that should be approved within the next month.
What page is all that?
Are we talking gray water here, Arnie?
Gray water.
So
Yep.
gray water,
Okay.
yeah.
It's one of the
Excuse
bullet
me, I
points.
said secondary water system, I meant
Yeah.
gray water.
That's
Sorry,
why I
I
was
meant gray
sitting
water.
here going,
Thank you,
what?
thank you. I meant gray water.
So we want to separate these items out to really allow one move forward and then deal with
And
the other ones
is
separately.
To move where it goes when it goes.
That makes a lot of sense, because there has been a lot of movement, it seems, on gray water systems development in
And
the past few years.
They should be ready to go the new rules should be in effect within the next month, which
Oh, great.
gives the city and the county the opportunity to put those ordinances into their planning so that all new facilities would have them.
That seems a priority item
Yes.
that we can distill out of what was discussed in this last update.
And I
Correct.
would say too, that with the composting toilet, I've had discussions about composting toilets with Orion, and I wouldn't say he's against them.
Right.
But yeah, I think I do agree with, they do need to be separated out, because that's a whole
Yeah.
different animal, composting toilet versus gray water. And I think that's a great idea to, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot packed into this update, and I think
Yeah.
that's a lot of what needs to happen, really pulling out
Yep.
what things have momentum behind them and what's going to take a lot more work.
So I know in the plan that they're separate
Okay.
already. Yeah,
Okay,
so I
great.
pulled out gray water and, because Orion looked at it too, and he said, we knew it was coming soon.
Yeah.
So it said over a certain size of a development, maybe require gray water. So one of the things in the back of the mind is like, okay, what ordinance would make affordable housing more expensive and what wouldn't? And so that's why there's sort of this distinction between how about gray water of buildings or remodel under a certain size and over a certain size. So that's how it reads now.
But as long as you're working it out.
One thing that came up kind of at the top of the document was the idea that there needed to be a schedule of replacement for the city of Moab's water distribution system's water mains. And I wondered if that had been developed, because it seems like it's very much a staff item, but it seemed very important to me and very brass tacks. But do we know? Does anyone know? If
Which one is that?
Culinary water plan.
Just
Upgrading lines.
a plan, a longer-term vision
Oh,
for.
like fix things that are broken.
Yeah, but be planning ahead for expecting breaks.
We do have that
Okay.
in theory. So we are on the verge of doing our first, water line upgrade in the
Okay.
near future, like coming up next year. But as of yet, it's been put off. We started this in like 2014. Rebecca Andrus was the city engineer, and Jeff Foster was the public works director, so they introduced the concept of asset management to the council. Kyle was there. It was a bit sticker shock, it costs a lot due to the past budgets being a lot lower and so on. So, but they accepted it, and but then Rebecca Davidson took over as city manager, and she wanted master plans for everything before we started really doing any projects. She didn't really trust the staff. So that the water got put off, but we did do one sewer upgrade. So now we've got master plans and a good engineer and good city manager. So I expect we will be doing some more water replacements in the near future. We're planning to do the worst problem, according to Levi, which is Mill Creek Drive from 4th East to Powerhouse Lane. It's a very old pipe, and it breaks regularly. I don't know if you remember from like 5 or 6 years ago, we had a very cold winter, and a pipe broke under the creek on 4th East that goes by where Pat Creek Bridge is. And it turned out that the main was actually under the creek as opposed to strapped to the bridge, because back when the main was put in, there was a ford or very small bridge instead of what's there now. So that was neglected or unknown actually by the city until the main broke there 6 years ago. And then they had to find out the hard way in a big hurry. And so we had to get an engineer to redesign the water line to strap it to the bridge, and we did that. But while that was broken, the main on Mill Creek broke or something up there, and the high school was out of water, I think, for a short period. So it was very embarrassing, and we're trying to avoid those things in the future.
So are you asking for like something that we might include in this that would give us a sense of what the plan is?
Well, yeah, we could get Levi, I can talk to Chuck, and we could come up with what is on paper a plan to do these things, because there's supposed to be so much money budgeted every year now for asset management in regard to water and sewer.
It sounds like the knowledge about where the high priority areas is there. It's just a matter of making that institutional knowledge or putting that down on paper.
Yeah, it's like having a project list.
Yeah.
Chuck's trying to draw up a capital improvements plan for the next 5 years. So these are the type of things which should be on there, and we can get him to describe. So
sometimes it's best if you're doing road projects, you're going to have to tear up everything.
Yeah.
If new projects such as 100 West, sometimes it's best to get everything done underneath the street before you.
So
when you do the development,
there's
a lot of properties that are going to be developed.
The city council did pass a stormwater master plan in the last 2 years, and then there is a draft culinary water master plan.
I think it's approved, but I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, I don't actually recall that it was approved, but I'm pretty sure it has been assigned a legislative number. So it's probably just put off. But just yesterday, Chuck did present the 5-year capital improvements plan to the council. So there is, at least the draft plan of culinary water exists.
It seems like a thing that could be useful to add to this might be, not add these things, but add links to them so that, okay, here's things that feed it, and then maybe have a paragraph or two in here that just helps explain like an executive summary of it, so that we don't make this thing 700 pages long, but there's something that's saying the city has a plan for stormwater improvements and a plan for this, and you can find it here, and the summary is in the next 5 years they're going to tear up every street in town or whatever.
Yeah, and the good news is that none of this existed at the time that this was written. Yeah. So, and
But can I add one thing though about the capital improvement plan? That is more like sewer lines. I don't know if it has green infrastructure in there, and so that might be a missing link. And I read the stormwater management plan after it was approved, and I really don't remember. And so, I mean, that might be something we could look at too, because, again, it's just perspective of an engineer looking at things in terms of pipes and other people looking at in a different way.
Right, and because the stormwater plan was approved without any review by this committee, David's invitation was that it can just be reviewed by this group with recommendations for amendments. So we have that on the table.
And that's exactly what I think could be useful to have in here. Okay, the plan is this. Here's some things that we feel would be helpful to add to it when it's revised or whatever that will reflect some of the water concerns we have. I think that's a great mechanism to get that into, because by necessity, an engineer's looking at it very much on pipe sizes. How do I get stuff from here to there? So having that other perspective of it, then when the revision happens, it can be like, okay, wait, now how do we make that actually work so that it's not a surprise? It's more of a, oh, okay, hang on, that can make this piece easier. And that kind of thing.
I think the engineering explained to us that their idea was to get rid of as much water as they could immediately.
As fast as possible.
And then our
function
was to determine how we could use light amounts and divert those to other needs.
So we should, if we're going to talk about stormwater management, we should have this as an agenda item and another.
Yes,
Yeah,
we should, because the other thing that comes into play with if you move into real green infrastructure and true retention, right now we have a fabulous example of it happening at 5th West in an anonymous park. We have this great wetlands. but what happened when that happened? I mean, there's ducks, there's everything, there's great, I mean, it's fabulous, and it's soaking in. But now mosquito abatement wants it drained because it's gonna create a mosquito problem. And so that's, you know, and I had a long chat with Libby about it. That's a reasonable thing to be talking about. However, how do we meet both needs? And I think that's exactly what you're getting at. It's, you know, it's like, hang on.
Well, at the end of the conservation plan update, there is a kind of addendum with a stormwater management scenario. So within that city document, there is this, at least an interest in looking at what these things are. And so I would say let's, as a point of homework, whether for the next meeting or the following, review the stormwater master plan in the context of what we have in this city plan and see what we can distill and what we want to recommend.
So I kind of remember we talked about the storm drain master plan at a meeting last year. I remember having a discussion with Arnie.
And they told us to keep our nose out of it.
I don't remember that being said.
Well, not exactly in those words.
Not exactly in those words.
No.
But I mean, just to correct what Kyle said, I mean, we're not interested in getting the water to the creeks as quickly as possible. We're interested in preventing damage and creating liability. So if a green infrastructure project doesn't interfere with that, there's no problem. It's not that we're trying to eliminate green infrastructure.
Isn't there a pilot project over on 300? Am I getting this right?
100 South.
100 South, sorry, yeah. What's the status of that, or what can you say?
Next year, I think. We didn't want to do 100 South and Cane Creek Boulevard at the same time as we did 100 West, because it's too big of an interference for traffic flow. So we put those off. We're going to do Cane Creek probably this year, and I think maybe 100 South the year after, but.
And there is green infrastructure designed into that project? Is that something we could look at in the context of this broader conversation?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you
100
can
South.
look at it. I mean, Chuck has some disagreements with the type of green infrastructure that we proposed on that project, though.
Sure.
And mostly having to do with the water table being so high that the contaminants are getting into the water table, you know, in addition to replenishing the aquifer. So it's got a mixed, you have to discuss it with him. He's more familiar with these issues from Arizona, where he was an engineer for years.
That would probably be a long discussion, but a worthwhile one to have, because I have 10 questions just at the outset hearing that, but we'll get to that later.
Well, it sounds like maybe that's something to get onto an agenda in the future.
Yeah,
maybe
that makes sense.
Go over that project as I think an example.
Yeah.
You know, it's great to say we want to include this stuff, but if we actually take something and work through what are those implications, what are the concerns, I think we could come up with a better policy.
Tying into everything else we do to really make public this project and kind of take it as a public example of what we're trying to do and not let it just slide under the table and then see it when it's done, I think. Yeah, why don't we set up a review of this project, or maybe a discussion with Chuck at some point about his concerns?
I think it would be important to have a discussion about his philosophy in regard to green infrastructure versus the more popular conception of it, let's say.
Is that something we should put, like, pick a month to have that on the agenda so we can give, maybe find out from him when that would be good for him?
Can we do that?
Not saying we're going to do it next month, but is there a good time for him to put that on our agenda?
Discussion about the 2020 green infrastructure project with any?
Okay, with Chuck?
Yeah.
With Chuck.
And just a general discussion as far as what's best for, you know, implementing green infrastructure in Moab.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like a case showcase.
As an example of that, so we can. So that might, because I mean, I could see that taking up almost a whole meeting.
Sure. Yep. Maybe later this summer.
Yeah. So that might be a good one to. And we could do it when Chuck feels like it's a better time, so we aren't springing it on him like, oh hey, we want this in 4 weeks.
Yeah. And that would give us time then to review if not all of us have, review the plan and in the context of this conversation.
It seems there's some techniques that they're not all the same. So you have to understand which ones, according to his understanding, are not as good and which ones are fine. So I think that would be important as far as just harmony between the staff and community.
Yep. It seems like a conversation is needed just to understand everyone's perspective a little better, because otherwise it might just come to a head.
Yeah.
Yeah, and along those lines, maybe a presentation about like rain gardens, or what we just did at the Mark last year.
Yeah, because there are several other projects in town that have a vision, so maybe we get a few different viewpoints on what it looks like. Yeah. Great. Back to the conservation plan. Does anyone else have any specific comments or?
I have another one.
Yeah.
And that's on page 18. At the bottom of the page, future supply sources. And I have a little bit of trouble with using Colorado River water for
So my comment
culinary.
on that was that there was never a USGS report that said that.
No.
That was my first
Yeah.
comment
Sure.
on that.
Yeah.
No,
Okay,
it
but
wasn't.
the second
But
comment
I'm
is-
just saying we should just consider it for irrigation instead of culinary, because.
Yeah.
But didn't we get something from Mark Stilson
Marty Stilson
that said
He
that?
says stuff like
He
that, yeah.
says stuff like that in public meetings.
Yes,
but
he
we've never
does.
received a formal document saying that he thinks that we should be getting water out of the Colorado River.
And he
Well,
clearly
if
isn't
we
from
used
the
it for
USGS.
irrigation, for secondary water, for our secondary water use, it would make sense, but to use it, to trade our
pristine
pristine
for,
water for that doesn't make sense.
So I can see in retrospect, that this paragraph should probably be scrapped.
I would scratch that paragraph.
I think so.
Fair enough.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way to go
That's
about it.
that's an easy one.
Okay. Okay.
Probably a few other
Put
things.
in here, though, that if, one thing that wasn't in here, in the back, was that we could augment any water that's any culinary water that's being used for construction purposes or outdoor purposes, if we could augment that with Colorado River water as opposed to our municipal water. And they were supposed to build it,
Right, a pump out station.
pump out station down there when we had all the drilling going on, and they still are pulling water
Yeah.
from the Colorado River for dust mitigation as
Yeah.
opposed to going to the city or GWSSA for water. So that all works just fine as far as I'm concerned, but.
Right now.
Right now,
Yeah.
right now, but that's not necessarily, you could, instead of using this as a future supply source, you could have this in as our implementation, recommendations was to continue and/or make better use of water from the Colorado
Yeah.
River for non-municipal purposes. And if you just said non-domestic purposes or municipal purposes, you'd probably be just fine there. Non-culinary purposes would be the term.
So I don't think
Yep.
the county was gonna do a pump out station, but I haven't heard that it's been done.
The NEPA was done,
It was the
It
NEPA,
was on
yeah.
BLM, wasn't it?
it was on BLM, but the
BLM.
NEPA was done, and then
That's the
Is it
tailings,
GWSSA that was
the
doing
tailings
it, or?
pile.
I believe it was, I'm not sure who was.
Maybe we need to find out what's happening with that.
so what was happening, I know a little. So, then nobody, was willing to pay for the cost of it, and so then they asked me to write a grant, which we did last year.
That's right, and I wrote you a letter of support.
And then even like the county and Dana, and they were like, well, we didn't get permission yet to come up with our matching funds, and so the grant went in, but it wasn't as strong because we couldn't show financial matching other than a small amount by the city.
So the grant wasn't funded?
The grant was not funded.
Okay.
And that's where it died,
Right.
Well, that's,
Or paused.
or paused.
can we get that going again? How much was the match? I mean,
It's not that big of a project.
It really isn't. It shouldn't be.
It was the one that we had
Yeah.
plans for, there were plans and stuff.
So
Yeah.
did you go to Water Smart for that grant, or
Yeah, it was that Water Smart.
was that Water Smart? Maybe we should consider bringing that to the MOP in November, okay? Because they're due in January. We'll reenact that at the MOP, okay?
Okay.
Good idea.
Good idea.
Yeah, it's a really good idea.
Great.
So I just wanted to say one thing about the pumping out of the river idea. It seems it's not practical really for GWSSA or the city to do that at this point. So they don't need it. We have plenty of good water like that. But if San Juan County needs water, that's been discussed as a way to augment their groundwater if the groundwater management plan fails to give them what they need from the groundwater, which seems likely. I think they're going to be severely limited over what they currently get. They're 500 acre feet. They're trying for 5,000, but I don't think they're going to get that much more than 500 based on what I've heard from Mark Stilson. But that, I could be wrong. But if that's the case, then it's likely that at a certain point, 10, 20 years from now, that they will have to pump out of the river in order to develop according to that master plan that they've put forward. So in that case, the city and county or GWSSA may cooperate with that and be part of it in some way. But
they would need the city support for right-of-way. Because you got to be piped right-of-way. You're not going to truck it up there. They're going to pipe it up there. So they're going to need so they're going to need some city support and some county support for right-of-way. And where you put the plant is also the second question. Do you put it on the city property? There's a bunch of idiosyncrasies associated with that project. Right now, I think it's best we just leave it where it's at.
I just said it to inform everyone.
Yeah.
Keep it in the back of our minds.
Keep it in the back of our minds.
Is where it already is. But yeah, that's helpful. Yeah.
I get, for me, it's like these pages 15 through 18 that I think we could do some work on to update the numbers. The number of water connections obviously has increased significantly. And really, we don't necessarily, I think we need to update these charts with the years as they've been going by, but the report, you know, it's not due until the end of next year, but I think that I could work with, it'll be Levi, I think, has a lot of this data. And the treasurer's office collects this data.
And on that note, would it make sense to, as we go through what Mike has put together and the springs and well stuff, to include, since that will be much more detailed information than we've had in the past, to make sure we include that in some capacity as well?
I think that's a great idea.
Did we have a discussion about whether or not Levi would prefer to use ERCs?
Oh, right, as far as the metric that's...
The metric that we're using. I understand we're talking, when we talk dwellings, but are we talking apartments, or are we talking...
Right.
And maybe equivalent...
Yeah, so I think that would fit with the whole idea of revising these, is making sure we're using
equivalent residential
using the kind of units that are most useful to the most people, but then having a way so you can convert if you have the need to convert.
Right.
And because I think that came up earlier, there's acre feet, there's gallons, there's this, there's that. Let's use something consistent throughout.
Yeah, and then to me, the number that's always been most important to me is the build-out capacity for the city, which it seems like we must have well exceeded the build-out capacity by now. 11,000?
If there's 4,000 rental units and overnight units, and there's 2 people per unit.
Yeah, or 16.
That's conservatively.
So I think that, and this is the data that so many people around town are looking for.
Yeah.
15,000 and 21,000 people right now.
Yeah, I think these definitely need a reworking.
Yeah.
Which will take a minute.
Well, I think that to me, these are the pages that, if we're coming up with conclusions about build out, which is, you know, when you look at the meat of the document, like what's the most useful to the planning commission or the city council or the county council, these are the pages that it all boils down to.
We're full.
And I think on that same note, on page 21, the institutional and political factors section needs to be updated as well, because things have changed a wee bit since 2016.
Yeah.
So,
Is this doing every 4 years, or every 5?
5.
usually 5.
I thought it was 5, since 2021 this is due.
Yeah, that's what I had,
That is all of
2021.
a sudden 2 years away, isn't it?
Yeah, but you know what? It's already halfway through this year.
Yesterday?
Yeah.
Halfway through this year.
It's already halfway through this year, oh my God.
That was, and I guess that was why I initially brought up this idea is, one, I don't think any of us had really looked at this document in a while, and also, next year's the year, if we're gonna revise it in 2021, looking at it now, especially since this was the first one, I always hate it when you go back to revise this and you're, something like this, and you're finally
Scrambling.
looking at it, and then you're like, oh, wait, we have 6 months to do it, oh no, you know, it makes more sense to look at, start it now.
Plus, it might, you know, if we work on it now, you know, one of the things I came across is, because I just read this Grand County resource thing, and, you know, they have a totally different number for, you know,
Yep.
how many, you know, per capita per
I-
day, the
I
same
would-
year,
I
and it'd be
would-
nice, like,
I
maybe
would
at the
trust
map.
this number over that number, just because I know the source on that number. Just saying.
But, you know, when we're sending stuff to the state, you know, if Moab says something and the county's saying something else, I mean, maybe at the MOP, that might be better because there's so many partners there to say, okay, where are these numbers from to be consistent? Otherwise, people start to go, yeah, they don't even know what the per capita is. They're making these numbers up.
Right.
When I said something, we're gonna talk to Levi, I assume, and I said something about ERCs. Ask Levi what makes sense to him in terms of how we're looking at where we can conserve water. I mean, dwellings is one thing, but if you've got an apartment building, it's a dwelling, and so many, ask him what would work best for
Okay.
him.
Yeah, because the other thing about buildup is, you know, if we, you know, the hotels are using, what do we figure out, 16%? And so build out, you're just looking at residential, right? You're not looking at the effect of tourists. And
Well,
if that's,
so it does factor that in, but so the numbers that were in this report were based on the number of nightly rental units at that time, which was significantly less than we have now. So, you know, it's,
Okay.
I think it's gone up by well over 1,000 units
Yeah.
since then. But there is an actual number that the travel council, I think Zachariah's office, they have the actual number, because they count.
They get it. Don't they get it from the travel council?
Yeah, it might be the travel council, but they count commercial campsites that have water and sewer connections, and all of the nightly accommodations that are hotels, but also bed and breakfast and all of it.
so there's, because my point is, like, the population was going up, whatever, 1.7%, but the tourist is going up so much more. So was that estimate?
Yeah, so
Okay.
it was part of the math problem. So
Okay.
if you have exponentially more tourists, you can only have a smaller number of permanent residents before you reach build out. And that's why
Okay.
it's so much less than they used to say, which was like 78,000 people or something like that. And so now, even in 2016, we were saying that the total number of permanent residents inside the city limits it would cap at 11,000, and that was in 2016.
Okay.
So now, obviously, if there are exponentially more hotels,
That would come down.
it brings the cap farther down.
And there's been some change in zonings, hasn't there, in terms of allowing increased density in places in the city?
Not in the city,
Not
in
in
the county.
That's in the
Not
county.
in the city, just in the county.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
so-
then, but there's also been some zone changes as far as residential to nightly rental capacity and things like that. So yeah, it needs to be updated.
Yeah.
Similar but related, or different, I mean, pages 6 to 8. I think it would make sense in light of a lot of the conversations we've had to separate out water rights from source and capacity, which kind of links to the whole idea of Mike's information, because the rights, you know, the paper water versus the wet water, I don't think they belong in the exact same section. They might be right after each other, but it's been a lot of what we've talked about the last 2 years, is the difference between those two things.
Yeah.
And I thought that, I have to say, I thought that those couple pages were really confusing. I think actually having a map there would really help, and,
Maps for water sources are protected information.
well, like,
It can be
in the
done better, though.
narrative, like, they talk about Birch Springs, and then it's not even in the chart, and so I was like, well, where's Birch Springs? Where is Birch Springs?
I've never heard of that.
I think that Mike's information, we can, if that gets incorporated in here, and then I think it could simplify this a lot and make it easier to read if we pull water rights separate from wet water.
Yeah.
They're different things.
Well, they do make a point in here that one of the major fallacies in the past has been to think about paper rights and not, or paper water, not wet water. So whoever wrote this really thought it was a big deal
Right.
too. They put a sentence in there.
No,
and
no,
said,
no, I
yeah.
know, but I think it would help reinforce that.
Oh, yeah,
if we
absolutely.
Had two separate sections.
Right,
Plus,
I
we're in
agree.
the middle of the adjudication stuff. By the time this comes out, a lot of that should be actually completed. So, I mean, that section is gonna need to be updated anyway.
Who did write this anyway? You did? In 2016?
Yeah, when I
Had
knew,
some help, but
I
yeah.
knew nothing, but it was Weisheit and Jeff Adams helped me,
Okay, I just
and
wondered.
Levi.
No, and that's, and I mean, it's, there's nothing wrong with it. But I think the idea is, that's why I want to talk about it now, because I think we've been doing this long enough now that we can look at this with clearer eyes.
Yeah, I think this happened the first time I walked into David's office.
Yeah.
He said, hey,
Write this water plan.
we need somebody to write this thing.
So, yeah,
Look how far it's taken.
Yeah, I know. I feel like
that's awesome.
I'm
No,
not
it's
a
great.
librarian anymore.
Nobody's taken your name in vain, so.
Well, see,
Maybe Jerry
it's her name
McNeely.
on either, so.
It's not about this. They took you.
So we can certainly go through a few more points if we'd like to now. I think the thing that strikes me is that if we have a list of what we've all been discussing today that we can revisit, let's say in 6 months,
Yep.
with the idea that we do that periodically, and then in the year leading up to the actual new plan, we're looking at it maybe on a bi-monthly basis, something like that. But if we could just distill from these minutes and the notes that you've taken what we've discussed so far and have that moving forward, I think that would be the takeaway for now, in addition to our own little action items.
And I think it could really be helpful in mapping out future meetings and ideas like what came up of having Chuck come to talk about green infrastructure. Like, I think it's a way it can really help us make sure that we're having meetings that are helping us get the information that we need to revise the plan effectively. So,
Great.
yeah, I like it.
I think it would be valuable that when we get Chuck here, we have some prominent advocates for green infrastructure like Jeff Adams.
Sure.
So that there can be a lively debate of informed persons.
We
Agreed.
can make sure that happens.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I just ask one question of you old timers in
Yes.
terms of living here, not age? Grand Old Ranch House, is that Moab Spring Ranch?
Springs Ranch, yes.
Okay. See, that's why when you don't put addresses in for, people that are new, it's very like you're trying to figure out where these things are.
I think, and
Turn right at the big cottonwood tree.
Yeah.
right. Yeah, the
Yeah,
old
there's a-
cottonwood was a sad
No, they
thing.
took it off.
You can't use the old cottonwood
No,
as a
you can't.
descriptor anymore.
No.
It's so sad.
So sad.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think either addresses or what the new name of the business, or what the new name of the location is.
Great. Would anyone else like to add anything for now to this? Otherwise, we'll move on to.
If I could interject, I know this is probably inappropriate. I'm Doug McMurdo from the Times Independent, and I'm looking at this as a journalist and what readers would be interested in. And on page 29, the paragraph above the recommendations for water conservation measures, it says that elsewhere in the report, it's recommended the city embrace an initial goal of 25% reduction in culinary water consumption for both indoor and outdoor use over the next 5 years. Is everybody tracking that?
Well, that's what we're gonna talk about here in this next article here. We've talked about this a couple times, and we were gonna talk about this with Rosemarie's thing, and no, the answer to your question
Perfect
at this point in time Nobody's tracking that at this point in time. The short answer to your question is nobody's tracking that at this point in time. When that's going to start and how that's going to work, we're going to have a short discussion on that in a second.
If I can explain, I normally would never interject.
You're fine.
But you guys are kind of like having a casual, informal conversation. There's not going to be a vote taken. So
Right.
I would never, ever discuss anything.
Well, it definitely is a good segue into what we're talking about next. So why don't we move on? Discussion and possible action regarding water data, including Moab water facts. So we all have this item before us, and you've requested that we have a look at it. And if we had any comments, one of my first comments was if there is a discrepancy between that goal and then what's listed here, or not so much a discrepancy as just an explanation as to what we're doing with it now in the context of what you're working on, Rosemary.
Sure, and just to put it in context, so yesterday was the first time that the city council saw the plan, and it's still a draft, so they haven't adopted it. So we're going to go back when it's finalized, but they wanted information before it was finished, because I think they're tired of getting things like a plan after it's done, and then they feel like they didn't have a chance to have input. So that's why this was like one of the first times they saw something as a draft. So the difference between what's in the conservation plan and what's in the sustainability plan is in the conservation plan, it just talks about water reduction at city facilities and residents. So there's like a per capita goal, and there was outdoor water use by the city organization. So in this one, we added businesses. So that's a new one. And then the other new element is protecting the quality of water, because it was just a water quantity reduction and not thinking about the quality of our water and how certain things affect it.
So can
Okay.
I did read this. I may have read it on plane, but I read it. I've discussed earlier that the governor had a water conservation goal. And then Huntsman said one thing, and then our newest one, I can't think of his name because I can't do names today. Herbert came out with a different one. I thought it was by 2025 that everybody was supposed to bring themselves into a 25% reduction. And I've seen it thrown out several different times on we're doing different metrics for that. And I'm wondering why we don't just use the governor's time slot. We can find the data on how much water was used in 1997. That should be available, even if it's just the gross amount of water that we pumped. And if we're looking at an overall percentage, we've got whatever that is, and we can actually benchmark it to what the governor said in 2025. Come back, let's talk about it and see what we've done. You didn't include a date when this would actually start. And that's kind of what I was thinking too. And I for some reason, I'm hooked on this Herbert thing because I think it's part of the groundwater. I am hooked on it. I think it's also when it comes down to we're sitting down at the groundwater management plan, we need to know how much we've conserved already at this point in time. And that's kind of why I would like to start with that date, because I do know we've done well compared to a lot of other cities.
Well, one of the reasons, there are some internal goals that are different. We were trying to come up with the same goal for everything, because if we're tracking carbon, we want to have, like 2016, this is our reduction from then, rather than having for the water goal one thing, for the energy one thing, for carbon one thing, for recycling one thing. So we're trying, that's where the 2032. And as soon as they approve the sustainability plan, it would be starting. So our base year was 2016. And we start reporting 2019. So this report was saying, okay, so this is the data we got for a base year. That's all I was being held accountable for, really.
I guess my biggest problem is that I believe we've cut our water use by, I'm taking a number off the top of my head, since 1997 in terms of per capita anyways, by at least 10%. And taking another 20% with another 16 years is going to be really tough.
Especially
Yeah.
if it's drought years.
No, I totally get it. So in 2008, the 2020 vision was cutting our energy consumption by 20%, and we're up 34%. So,
Well, and maybe a way of addressing this is if, for the purposes of how you're looking at this, you're using 2016 as your benchmark, or as your beginning point, maybe giving some context to that is a way of saying, okay, so in 1996 or 1997, whatever, it was this. In 2016, it's this. From here forth, we're going to go with that but then it at least gives that nod to where was it, where is it in 2016, and then that, so it can stay consistent for your other purposes, but at least give us that. Would that to some degree, Arnie, help meet your need on this?
You know what? She has a good point. I really hope you're still here in 2032.
Does the,
And you know what?
I wouldn't bet money on it, to tell you the truth.
I'm hoping I'm actually still here in 2032 because I'm an
we're
old.
all still here in
32.
Oh, I thought you meant Moab, not in general.
If we want to go with 2016 and start everything, I'm going to acquiesce to that because that's the data that you have when you want to do everything else. Somewhere down the road, when we get to the groundwater management plan, we will need to know how much we reduced, how much we made towards the governor's goal. And at some point in time, if we could at least show that to the council, where we're at towards the governor's goal starting in 1997, that probably appeased me at this point in time.
Well, and that's kind of what I was getting at, was just even just comparing, 10 years back.
Trends.
We already went down this much, or we've been up this much, or whatever it is. I think that gives some good context.
And did we?
So what was the state one again? From 25% from 1997?
I believe it was. We've had the conversation before. I believe it was 1997. When did Huntsman leave office?
I don't remember.
it had to be
It's a while ago.
Which time?
China, right? I don't.
It was somewhere in that neck of the woods. I do have the quote on it somewhere.
Okay.
I can find it for you.
2000.
But
It
again,
was in that area.
No, I agree. I think having trends is good. I mean, that's why we went with 2016, so we could at least look at 3 years of, this is,
So when you got down here 20% by the year 2032, I don't have any units on that.
So so everything is from the baseline year. So it's this benchmark. So it's
Is it per
C
capita?
under benchmark.
Is it per capita? Is it total
So
amount of water use?
it'll be per capita, per business, and city-owned outside water use. So those will be three benchmarks.
Those would be the three benchmarks.
Yeah.
Okay, that was my question. And you're going to go for 20% on all three of them.
Right.
Okay, let's give it our best shot.
Does anyone else have any other, or anything else you'd like to say, Rosemary, or anyone else have any other comments on what they read?
oh, on this one, there was on the top of page 18, there's a sentence that doesn't.
That was one of, I've got a few things that are more fussy that I can just send via email if that's easier, but there's just a few grammatical things, and then that was one of them, and a couple others, which I don't know if they're worth going over.
Yeah, Lisa's comments aren't in there, so if they're grammatical, they probably aren't checked yet.
And the biggest one I had was, I'm finding this section, the formatting kind of awkward. So I was thinking if that could somehow be changed so that.
To a table?
Either to a table or to something that doesn't break things up the way it does. And that just seemed like a formatting thing. And I didn't have the time to format it, but I think that there's, whether it's a few tables or something like that, and even just the total amount of groundwater currently considered appropriated, and you have water rights with a number in parentheses plus base flow with a number in parentheses equaling another. Maybe there's a way to format that where it's easier to read it.
Because this is from our fact sheet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've got a question on that. And then the other thing, I've got a question on the facts. I really didn't think we had the groundwater being used at 17,000 acre feet. I thought it was 7,796.
I agree with Arnie. I don't know where this number's coming from.
That one number, just that one number, dear.
Where is it?
Which number?
Estimated total amount of water currently being used currently is 17,000, and I thought that was supposed to be 7,000. I think it's just the typo.
Oh,
It looks like that Moab City
Not
should
seeing
be
17,000
two
anywhere.
thousand 200.
Where you were talking? just this
83
first
numbers.
And that is correct.
Oh, down there.
That's where the extra 1,000 came in. Okay, got it. So Moab City is actually using about 2,200 acre feet of groundwater at this point in time, if I remember correctly. That's right.
That sounds right, I
That
think.
sounds right. And that's where the extra 10,000 came in.
okay. So it's 7,796.
Yes. and
That's scary.
There's been that was scary. There's been some slight changes to that, and I think what I'll try to do is, you don't have to update this. They're close enough as far as I'm concerned. But with the adjudication process and some of the things that happen, Jeff has some new numbers out there that we've been working with Mark Stilson on. And I think what I'll task Jeff to do is talk to me about it and see if we can update some of those numbers.
Okay.
But for this document, as it sits right now, those numbers are just fine for what we have going on. We're only talking 400 acre feet, 400 or 500 acre feet in differences from the adjudication process at this point in time.
So I wanted to bring up what was the discussion that we had down at the County Planning Commission. At least we didn't come to any conclusions, but in regard to the numbers, what engineering is working towards is trying to come up with something that coordinates with the USGS study and their estimate of the groundwater, update on what's available. We're trying to work with Ken Combe, and we're trying to sort out what the Division of Water Rights uses for numbers as discharge and recharge. Like, for instance, they use Shealy as discharge, but common sense tells us that a lot of that water is going back in the ground, and then it's being measured. It was apparently being measured by USGS at their discharge measurement at the river.
You were talking double counting.
Right.
And yeah, we were a little concerned with that because it's tough to ferret those numbers out.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So we're working on trying to come up with how much water is actually being used, and what is the recharge, what is the discharge, and they should all add up, basically.
There's currently large arguments or big discrepancies between when you recharge it, is it actually usable? Or does it get put back into the groundwater system below where there's any capability of taking it out? So that discussion goes on too. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so we're trying to basically come up with a boundary condition, what actually leaves, which seems what USGS measured as that was their discharge measurement. So what actually comes in and what actually goes out, and what's used in the middle. So like that.
Right.
And there's some disagreement with Jeff and Arnie, I think, in that regard.
Yeah, there's disagreement on that a lot. You know what? I'm taking a step back, and this may not be the discussion we're having on this right now, but I'm digressing a little bit. Is that most of that water is going into the valley fill?
Right.
It's not. None of it's going back into the Glen Canyon group.
No.
And when you see the difference between Mill Creek at the mouth, which is basically Glen Canyon aquifer water, and Mill Creek above Pack Creek, there's really no difference in the flows there. So everything's really in Pack Creek. Any recharge double counting that we're having, any coming back down into Pack Creek, and or that 800 acre feet that's seeping out the bottom of the wetlands. And in the big picture, the amount of water that's in Pack Creek isn't really substantial compared to what the other numbers we're looking at.
Right.
So we could have the discussion, but from the 30,000 square foot view, I think we're gonna beat ourselves over a dead horse for a small amount of water that's not probably worth beating ourselves up over.
Well, yeah, that's our job as engineers.
Our job, yeah.
Chuck's job is to inform the council of what his best understanding of the numbers.
Yeah, that sounds great.
We're working towards that.
Any further comments?
Yeah, the benchmarks
Yeah.
in gallons. Everything else is in acre feet.
Yeah, that would be useful to keep consistent.
And the unavailable data, it seemed like in this report, if I remember correctly, we did some extrapolation about, the winter water use, so that we could winnow out we could sort of extrapolate what the actual indoor use was compared to the outdoor use, because we got the readings from like December or January when there was no outdoor watering.
And I think the biggest, and I remember, I mean, that's been used historically in Moab a lot, and I think the biggest trouble with that now is, I think you have to call it outdoor water and visitor water use or something, because when the visitor numbers go up, your indoor water use is going up as well. So there's a seasonal, like,
Right.
you know, when the license plates turn green, which is
Yeah.
when the buds come out, it's not exactly just outdoor water that's making it go up anymore.
Yeah, it seems like we could do even more careful analysis of occupancy rates, because anymore, the tourists are here most every month.
Yeah, but there's a serious upswing
Sure,
when the
there
license
is.
plates turn
When the
green.
rain starts, yeah, stops.
So anyway, but I think we could come up with a guesstimate, and I think the critical thing is just putting some caveats to that. Because I think you could make some unreasonable expectations of reducing what you're thinking outdoor water use is, if you're also getting visitor use, you know.
Well, and actually those connections are commercial connections. And so the treasurer's office tracks residential connection use and commercial connection use. So there's
Except that a lot of the nightly
can-
rentals
yeah.
are not commercial. Are they built, like, are VRBOs built that way?
they should be if they're
Well,
legal. If
But
they're
that's the problem. That's kind of my point.
Well, no, I think most of them are legal now. There are some known illegals that they're working on.
Yeah,
Well, we could put it in. The thing is, in the inventory, we had to follow this protocol.
Oh,
So it's a 167-page protocol of what data counts and what doesn't. So when you have like assumptions, then it can't go into the carbon inventory. I mean, it could go into the report, but that's why it's unavailable, because if it didn't fit what the criteria had to be for it
Fit
to
that
be
box.
sound.
Will it ever be available then, I guess is my question? I mean,
It depends on time. Like the time to track some of this data. Like it's available if somebody, you know,
is
has that
it?
much time to do
It
it.
doesn't seem like it is unless you actually extrapolate,
right.
because it's all one water meter for every home.
I mean, so I guess this is something, because I'm not seeing the whole thing this fits into. So I don't know a lot of these other constraints that this is fitting into. So I guess we're kind of talking, I mean, there's two different things. So if this has to have what it has to have, maybe there's a few things that could go in here
Yeah.
that don't go in here. So if, for instance, Arnie's desire to have a longer timeline of looking at the water use over time changes, and then maybe some things like, you know, estimations of
That's a great idea.
outdoor water use versus indoor water use could go into this, so that because then that gives us an understanding, or at least maybe a dangerous understanding, I don't know, but it gives us a picture of what we think we understand it to be. And then if we start to see, oh wait, we're doing all of these things, and all kinds of people are doing reductions in exterior watering, but we're not seeing the numbers drop, then that tells us something, even if it's still muddy. So maybe that's a place that some of that could go, so that we aren't trying to push this into a box it doesn't want to fit in.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
We're running out of time.
Any other thoughts? Otherwise, since we have about a half an hour, I'd say we move on to our last item. That sound good? Okay.
Can I interrupt, Jeremy? So
Yeah.
I thought I saw VCAPs on the original agenda. Did I not see it on the original agenda? And it's not on this agenda at this point in time.
Remember.
And I would have said something, but I thought I'd saw it on an agenda in my email. I could be mistaken.
I will look.
But I do
Good
need
point.
5 minutes at some point in time to.
Yeah, why don't we talk about it now, because
Yeah.
it's about water data, because
There you go.
Let's jump in now.
I apologize. I
Yep.
think it's because I thought that we had
We talked about it last time, but we actually have a proposed work plan at this point.
Yeah, so
in
what
time.
it was we actually resolved it last time.
Right.
And then we just got this new information today.
So we asked for a work plan before the city or the county or GWSSA can fund this project. We actually need a work plan. And I explained to Seth that I was gonna be at this meeting today, and I got it at 9:15 this morning. I just read it as we went through it. I believe if you look at the overview and the second part of the overview, it will give us the information that we're hoping for in terms of climate and drought and what it could possibly do to affect the amount of water. The second part of the VCAP study is a little more defined in here than what he's given us in the past.
So one thing I noticed in this one, because I thought we were shooting for 7,000.
75, and that's what I told, he called
Okay.
me on the phone, I said, just as I came out of the canyon and help her. And I talked to him, and he goes, yeah, well, blah, 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 and then I said, well, I actually told him, at our last MOP meeting, I got 5 partners to come in, and said he gets 1,500, he said, well, I thought I told you 10,000. And if I could say this, I guess it's a public meeting, it's gonna be on the record. He told me he could be soft on that 10,000 if we needed him to, but I didn't necessarily want to ask him. I thought originally also he told me it'd be about $40,000 of his money and 7,500 of ours. It looks like we're splitting it 1/3 to 2/3. But the money that he's asking for is basically to pay for the graduate students' travel down here and for the facilitator, which are costs that he can't get reimbursed for in terms of salaries that they're already. So the graduate student's on a grant, okay? We don't have to pay them. And he's got funding for his time and effort. But their funding for the facilitator and for their travel is something that they can't recuperate out of their other budgets. And that's where the $10,000 is going towards.
Yeah, the reason,
So it's a legitimate expense item that he's not asking to profit from this. And he's very, very interested in doing this, obviously, if you read some of the emails. And I thought that's one of the things, well, I've heard it from several people over the years, we really want to do this. So in terms of the money, I did, and I'm giving you an update here as you're hopefully looking through this. I talked to San Juan County as per Carl's request, and Ben Musselman says that yes, he would be interested in being part of this. Whether or not he had any money or not was another story. If I could get 500 out of him, I'd probably be happy. I think we should, instead of worrying about the money at this point in time, and Sittler at this point in time has not volunteered up any other money. I was hoping to keep it to $1,500 per partner.
And have they said that they'd give 15?
Who?
Sitla?
No, Sittler said that they would give nothing because there's plenty of data out there. Those weren't his exact words. His exact words, how much data do you think we need? But you know, I know the person I'm dealing with there, and when he's very tight with Sittler money. He said he would run it up the chain. Maybe I should run it up the chain. But San Juan is the one that talks with them, and I believe if I work with Danny Musselman and the planning council down there, I could probably get them to push Sittler a little harder also. And that would be the avenue I would take. So you're right, but since 10,000 instead of 7,500, I still want to do this. How we can afford it, I don't know.
Did Mark Stilson, he committed some funds?
He committed some funds too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, who are the people who committed
Right now we
funds?
have Division of Water Rights, the City of Moab, the county, Grand County, GWSSA, and Canyonlands Watershed Council have committed to this, have said that they would like to fund this project, but they need a draft work plan.
Oh,
Okay, and so I need to get this out there to them. Like I said, I just got it today, so there'll be a nice email to everybody tomorrow.
okay.
But that's the update I wanted to give you on where we stand on this. And I could just leave it at that unless you have any other questions on it.
well, the reason I asked is because, like I said, this was a preliminary presentation to council, and so I'm going to go back in May, and so I was just going to up the ante because I put it high up on the list for 2019. And so, you know, I could put it up to 2,000.
If we had to.
Yeah.
Okay, that's.
Keep that in your mind, and then if you can drop it back down to 15, so be it.
Yeah.
So be it. If I drop it back down to 15, that's a great idea, Carl. Let's go for 2,000 from each of these individuals, and if I can gather a couple other stakeholders, This is not the kind of thing I can get a grant from water quality for because it doesn't help water quality.
Okay.
So, okay, that's my update at this point in
Okay.
time.
Okay,
Is
great.
there any other questions or any other suggestions from you folks on how I should proceed?
San Juan County's got new commissioners,
I know.
and they might be more receptive to this.
I realize that also. Yes, was the push to go get San Juan County, and Ben did call me back. And I have worked with Ben on other projects, so I have a good working with Ben, I have a good working relationship, and with their other planner, Nick Sanderson, is that his name?
Nick Sanderson.
Yeah, I have a good relationship with him also.
Sounds good. Our final discussion item is the USGS study update, informal discussion.
I think I told you all that it was 3 months out it's like to the printers, and they don't, like, it's all complete. Everything's complete about it, but it's to the printers, and I can't get any kind of update at all about how long it goes to the printers for. The author, what's her name?
Melissa?
Melissa Brooke. She said she has no idea. 3 months. So.
Well, and there's a lot of things going, I was just in another meeting earlier today, there's other projects that are waiting on things, going through processes like that, and it's taking longer than normal right now.
Yeah, and I did point out that their government, our government agencies that paid for the report are waiting. There's the moratoria for both the city and the county, and they're waiting on that data. I think it will inform their decisions. She was not moved.
No.
Denver, did you find some discrepancies between the two reports? So the last time I had an opportunity to read one, I had 2 days when I was on vacation, and I had a nice afternoon when it was raining, and I said, okay, I'm going to sit down and read this. I have not had that opportunity, and I beg forgiveness from everybody, to read the second draft at this point in time.
If I'm starting to say too much detail, Eric, would you just raise your hand? Okay, seriously, I don't want to get crossways with anybody. I sat down with these two things and went over them page by page, and it was a real chore, okay? But when I got through, I had, they've done what you do when you revise things. They cleaned it up, they got some typos, and you have to make your computer divide instead of multiply, so you don't get these weird ratios that aren't really ratios and so forth and so on. That's what you do. But one thing that was heartening is that it's clear to me that somebody with a lot of clout supervised the redoing of this, because they reorganized it so that it's much more coherent, and the subheadings come out so that a layman can come to it and have a much better idea what they're talking about. To me, the only substantive difference was when they discussed the discharge, and the discharge went up a little. Can I say how much?
Yeah.
Okay, it went up 2,000 acre-feet a year. The initial discharge was how much water goes into the Colorado River by whatever means, was 11 to 13,000, and revision 3, the second one, it was 13 to 15,000. So I looked and looked and looked, and I finally figured out they backed out in these two graphs here, what they've got on like what's what. They backed out the wastewater treatment plant, which took 1,000 acre-feet of a recharge out, and they added 2 new headings: springs and well withdrawals for culinary use, and well withdrawals for irrigation. And that ended up to a 3,000 acre-foot discharge. So we lost 1,000, or we gained 1,000, we lost 3,000. So the final number is that the number of acre-feet that come out of our watershed system, the discharge, is 13 to 15,000 feet. Now, I guess maybe 2,000 acre-feet doesn't sound like a lot of water if you're thinking about the Colorado River and all those millions, but that's enough water to keep the city going for a year. So I don't have, this is where I need some technical knowledge. There might be some really excellent reasons I loved that wastewater number because this is going to sound weird. It's so clean. I mean, it's a number. It's got a meter on a pipe. You know, that is so nice. And they rejected that and instead chose something else. But I can't help but think they did it with a whole lot of thought. And they had something in the original report about how difficult it is to calculate the irrigation and this and that, and how much really comes back and so forth. So somebody's really putting a whole lot of thought into this up at the highest levels, as best I can tell. I mean, they really did a nice job at getting it squared away. They ended up giving us credit for 2,000 more acre-feet a year than we did on the first time. And as best I can tell, that has to do with the sewage plant. Now, maybe the new sewage plant doesn't use much water, but I thought when I took the tour, they had an incredible amount of water that goes through there. But I was just hoping that some of the more technically competent.
Off the top of my head, Denver,
Yeah.
the water that is going out the Moab wastewater treatment plant was considered the water that was being withdrawn from the springs at the time for Moab City.
Yeah.
And any water that Grand Water was pulling out at the same time. Okay, so that water would not be coming out of the springs and so on and so forth. Which is why you wouldn't get it in some of the other discharges. Does that make sense? And what they did, Eric, you can help me with this if you want. What they did was that instead they substituted the numbers that hopefully the water treatment facilities and that we're pulling the water out, we're using. If that makes sense to you. So instead of using the number that's going out the pipe at the end to say this is how much water they were taking out of the springs, going out the other end, they're saying this is how much water they were taking out of the springs, and only 1,000 acre-feet actually ended up going out the Colorado River, out the wastewater treatment plant. Does that make sense to you, Eric?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so they've got a number coming out of the wastewater treatment plant. There was so much water being taken out of the springs while they're doing this study. Okay?
Yeah.
And they were, if I'm right, they were assuming that all the water that was being taken out of the springs is now going to the irrigation plant because nobody's watering outdoors.
You mean the wastewater
The
treatment?
wastewater treatment plant, excuse me, the wastewater treatment plant. All that water would be going out. What they've done is taken that out and put a number here for springs and well withdrawals for culinary use. So it appears that they went and got the numbers from the city and the county on what they were actually withdrawing during this time.
So they've refined it a little
So
bit.
they refined it in that manner.
Is this a question we could ask them?
This is a question we could ask them, and the biggest question I would have is then where do the other 1,000 acre, 2,000 acre feet go?
Well,
If it didn't go out the wastewater treatment plant.
Right, where is it?
And we weren't watering, and wasn't going back into the creek,
Where do we get it going?
2,000 acre feet going? Would be the question. Great job.
Because what I would ask you and Eric is,
No?
it seems it's pretty, do you have a lot of confidence that they can determine how much water was withdrawn from wells and springs and how much is for irrigation and non-irrigation? Do you think that number's a
Well, this is
good
outside
number?
irrigation season, so there shouldn't be any irrigation going on. That's why they do it in November. Okay, so it says for culinary use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but they called it well withdrawal for irrigation.
Well, this is down here at the very, very bottom where they've got about 200 acre feet. This is that other, that's just 200 acre feet.
And
It
this-
looks like it's 100.
Okay, so the big one is the springs and wells for
Big one is the
culinary
springs
use.
For culinary use, and then the small one, which looks like less than 100 acre feet there,
Okay,
is the ones for irrigation use.
but you guys trust the springs and wells withdrawals? I've got meters on it and all that, and that's,
Well, I trust those numbers. I want to know where 2,000 acre feet went.
Well, that's where I'm wondering if this is a question we should ask the author.
This is a very pertinent question we should be asking.
Because, I mean, we were given the first draft, we're seeing the second draft, seeing that, I mean, even from way over here without seeing anything, I can tell those graphs look pretty different. So it seems like just understanding what that change is, not in a confrontational way, but just so we understand.
It's likely this was a result of the peer review
Right.
discussion.
Right, but understanding it is probably helpful because that means they learned something too.
That's what I'm wondering. It seems like it would be entirely within the warrant of this committee for you to talk to Melissa Masbrook. I mean, I know Dr. Masbrook's a big deal, and she's ahead of all this, and she's got 1,000 publications and all that, but you can still talk to her, can't you, and ask her a question?
Or maybe it's in the methodology section in the back of where they get their numbers. Because if it's like this, you know, ICLEI protocol I have to follow, it's like, okay, you have to say any assumptions have to be in your methodology. And so maybe, I don't know if anybody went through the appendices, hopefully
If somebody could talk to Dr. Masbrook, I'm assuming she's a doctor, to Dr. Masbrook.
If you want me to, but what do you want me to say?
Or is
I
it
can send an email. I can send an email.
2,000 acre I mean, I think that.
But is that appropriate for me to come from me, or does it come from Eric and the city?
I mean, you read it, you have, it was given to you. I don't see any problem with you asking questions.
And I think it's just a simple, understand, I don't need, not.
Yeah, I just want to ask.
Just help us understand why what changed in these.
Maybe you should go talk to Chuck about this.
Well, plus, I mean, yeah, it's
Talk to Chuck.
not a bad idea.
I mean, ask him.
If he's gotten any information on this?
Yeah.
I don't think there's any prohibition against talking to her.
No.
I think,
Not yet.
what's interesting is that the cover letter from the
Wouldn't
author
hurt.
No.
with the new draft was that there weren't
Appreciate it,
really
too.
any substantial changes.
Probably would.
He's
So
not
it's
trying to get
interesting that there's
trouble with
2,000
No.
acre
She
feet
just wants to
that
be
just
Okay,
asking
so
professional-
in
professional.
play.
So in terms of the draft, at this point in time, the one thing that's been discussed is, and I don't mind
You
going,
want this?
Denver, I'll set up a meeting for you and me with Chuck, okay?
Great, yeah.
And then
Yeah.
Great.
we'll talk to Chuck and ask him for some clarification, see if he's got any ideas on it. And then either the city, Chuck, or somebody will send Melissa an email, just straight up.
Excellent. Yeah, that'd be great.
Just
yeah.
asking her to clarify this for us. This is our concerns with this draft.
Right, so,
And-
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Mark's kind of our academic, so Chuck had him read the second draft. So I think if,
Set up with Mark too.
yeah, Mark, you and Chuck. And then,
Mark, me and Chuck.
Yeah, then we can discuss.
Get
you can
Denver
dis-
involved too.
And Denver.
He
Bring
put in a
Denver.
lot of work. He read that.
Yeah, exactly.
Compared that to the other one, he did a lot of work.
If he's losing sleep with that.
And I think that's a good strategy to, talk first, of if it's, if the engineering department is like, oh, no, it's this, we're comfortable with it, it's not a problem. Because it's not, I think asking for clarification is not a bad thing to do. You're just wanting to make sure you understand it.
Yeah, no, I think we're
20% of
supposed
the
to.
whole total.
Exactly,
You know?
exactly.
It's a change.
It's
That's
not
a-
an
that's a big
insignificant
change.
amount.
Yep.
It is a significant number, so.
Yeah,
We need to know what we know moving forward when the final draft comes out, and if anything changes at that point too. So, thanks, Arnie, and thank you, Denver.
Yes, thank you, Denver.
If there's nothing else, then I would ask for a motion to adjourn. Okay. Kyle motions to adjourn. Cara seconds. Meeting is adjourned.
thanks.
All right, 10 minutes under the wire.
Yes, sir.
That's right, yeah.
From high school.
Which one?
It's fine. Yeah. I have to do it at some
Yeah.
point.